Today's guest on 5 a.m. Story Talk is a former refugee who became one of the youngest senators in the history of the Australian Federal Parliament. I'm talking about Senator Fatima Payman, and we're about to discuss the role of multiculturalism in Australia's art and identity, whether the country's current government is up to the challenges posed by the 21st century, and the senator's rage issues. Sorry, I mean her passion for the band Rage Against the Machine. Welcome back to 5 a.m. Story Talk, my friends. I'm Cole Haddon, screenwriter, novelist, coffee fanatic, and today is a bit of a milestone for this podcast. I'm about to be joined by my first elected politician, and I don't mean some local government official. I'm talking about a senator in Australia's federal parliament, the first to wear hijab in parliament, and one who's gained quite a name for herself over the past few years, whether that's through her occasional use of youth slang to make dramatic points about the political disenfranchisement of young voters, or her heavily reported conflicts with and ultimate divorce from the Labour Party over its handling of issues related to the war in Palestine. Whether you agree with her or not, Fatima Payman, Senator for Western Australia, has an abundance of integrity and, I think, courage. She's one of those politicians my deeply conservative father, someone who wouldn't have agreed with her about almost anything, would have nevertheless respected because at least he could trust she meant what she said. Before I go any further, I want to point out that Senator Payman was meant to be my third guest this season. Episode 2 was originally slated to feature my dear friend, comedian, actress, and musician Riki Lindholm. But recent events in Australia left me convinced I needed to move this conversation up. Sorry, Riki. You guys can catch my episode with Riki in 2 weeks. It's a banger, I think. As for what's been going on in Oz, well, a lot. Most of it related to freedom of expression and whose speech is actually protected, and the Labour Party, which currently controls the government, going out of its way to silence anyone who agrees with the UN that what was and arguably is still happening in Gaza is genocide. For example, what one might describe as an attempt by the South Australian Premier to censor a Palestinian author got the entire Adelaide Writers' Week cancelled. Meanwhile, the New South Wales Premier, again a member of the Labour Party, has been using extraordinary policing powers in the wake of the anti-Semitic Bondi massacre to silence dissent wherever possible, culminating in a violent, truly horrific crackdown on Sydney-siders this past week who were peacefully assembled to protest the visit of Israel's president. These cops literally attacked Muslims who were praying in an out-of-the-way corner of the protests. Listen, I understand Gaza is a controversial subject for many. I understand you might not agree with Senator Payman and the UN's own findings that genocide is an acceptable way to describe what happened to tens of thousands of Palestinians. But I hope we all can agree that people should have the right to feel and express themselves differently. The Labour Party, theoretically a left-wing party, but from my perspective a centrist party and increasingly a center-right party, seems to have flexible principles when it comes to rights, especially when it comes to the rights of Muslim Australians. Now, that's not sitting well with Aussies of all backgrounds right now who are struggling with the idea of prioritizing the rights or interests or safety of one group over another. It's worth noting Senator Payman and I spoke before the violent police attacks on these protesters, but we did speak shortly after she voted against new hate speech laws that were rushed through Parliament and many worry have further eroded freedom of speech in Australia. Our conversation weaves through all this cultural unrest and, by the bonus episode, really takes off as we break down a seminal piece of art from her life, Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name, a song that helped her find the determination, I suppose you could say, to walk away from the Labour Party for refusing to recognize Palestine as a state. By the way, 14 months later, Labour went ahead and recognized Palestine as a state anyway. A move that in no way, felt hypocritical after playing safe politics for the previous year plus. Again, while I don't expect you to necessarily agree with everything Senator Payman says, in fact, I'd be disappointed if you did. I hope you don't agree with everything I say here either. I do, however, hope you'll be inspired by her journey from Afghanistan to Australia's federal government and her commitment to her convictions. I hope she challenges you, and I hope our conversations around art and identity, art's role in cultural truth-telling, and in the bonus episode, the role of art in transformative political change and why so many seek to censor that kind of provocative creativity, makes you think about what's happening in our world today. That's enough setup. I think I just needed to offer up a bit more context for today's conversation, for non-Aussies, I mean. So let's do this. Let me introduce you to the independent senator from Western Australia, Fatima Payman. Welcome, Senator. It's so lovely to meet you, Fatima. How are you doing today? Where are you in Australia?
Thank you for having me, Cole. It's great to be with you. I'm currently based in Perth. It's a wonderful sunny day. While the rest of Australia, I think there's a heat wave going on. But no, it's wonderful to be home. I've got a few days before I go to Canberra for a sitting week, so making the most of it, coming into the office, making sure the team's doing well. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be chatting with you.
Thank you for being here. I'm in the middle of the heat wave at the moment, which has been a lot. As I mentioned, we moved this week, and so Monday, the hottest day apparently on record in Victoria, was the day that we decided a large move. Not smart. So I can't imagine a lot of people outside of Australia know who you are, but I think your story is pretty damn amazing. So can we start at the beginning? Can you tell me, how did you become Australian?
I wouldn't have become Australian if my dad didn't sacrifice his life and, take the risk of jumping on a boat back in 1999 and leave Afghanistan in pursuit of finding a place for his young family to grow and have the opportunities that obviously my dad and my mum didn't have. So, yeah, 1999 is when our story begins and our journey begins. Dad arrived, worked really hard around the clock, copped all forms of abuse because English was his second language, overworked, underpaid, whatever, just to save up enough to be able to sponsor his wife, 2 little daughters, and a son on the way. And yeah, we reunited with Dad in 2003. So I've been in Australia ever since. And it's been quite the incredible journey, trying to juggle between the various identities of being an Australian, what it means to be Muslim, but also with my Afghan heritage and what that means. So it's been, teenage years are supposed to be tough, but I think we may have had it a tad bit tougher because, you're constantly in this weird state of figuring out how much of which identity do I express.
The 4 years you were apart, you left, I think, if I understand correctly, at 5 or your father left when you were 5 for Australia. Mm-hmm. You didn't get reunited 4 years later. Did you remember him that much? What was because we didn't have Zoom at this time. People don't understand how hard it is for families to divide like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was 4 years old because, when we came in 2003, I was 8. I remember just hearing Dad's voice over the phone occasionally, but just looking at his photos and knowing that, Dad's out there trying to build a home for us. And, my mum really went through a tough time because she was pregnant on my brother, so her third child. And for about 3 months from the time Dad departed, she had not heard from him. Again, there was no mobile phones, no way of just instantly communicating or sending a text and saying, yeah, I've arrived safely, don't stress. So Mum actually went through, labor and raising this beautiful son for about 3 months before she heard that my dad was alive and he'd made it safely to this place called Australia. And he had, he was detained up in Port Hedland, but then he was going to be, sent down to Perth. So it was, again, just, I can't imagine what my mum went through, as someone who's pregnant myself now in my second trimester. Thank you. I really empathize with the stress, the anxiety that not only pregnancy brings with it, but, you're stressing about what the world's going to look like when you're delivering this baby and the changes that's going to come with it. So I've got so much respect. I mean, I've always had respect for women, but I think being in this situation and being an expecting mum, that respect has just multiplied 1,000-fold, and makes me realize how tough mum had it when she was going through all this back in, early 2000, like 1989 and 2001 and 2. It felt like returning home for some odd reason, because obviously reuniting with dad and, being a family again, when you're 8 years old, you don't understand, what does it mean to be in a different country, and the language's different, the culture's different, the way of life's different. All I remember, feeling was, wow, we get to see dad again. We're a family again. We live under the same roof together. And we had this little ritual that sort of went in through, high school, where every day after school, dad would either take us to the beach or the park, and we would just kick the ball. We would go for a swim. We would have cook sausages on the barbie. Like, it was just, and I just thought that was normal. Like, I never felt out of place until I decided to wear the hijab. And that was at the age of like 12. And I remember dad sitting me down and saying, are you sure you want to do this? Because it's a decision you make for yourself. No one's forcing you. No one is telling you that this is what you have to do. You do it when you're ready. And whenever that is, we'll support you all the way through. And I was super adamant. I was like, yeah, Dad, I'm ready. I want to wear the hijab. And that's when I started noticing the othering. You feel a bit out of place. You feel people staring at you funny, making comments like, go back to where you came from, towel head. And just really, as a young girl, I didn't feel out of place until all of a sudden this piece of cloth I put on my head meant that I no longer belonged the way I did, the day before when I didn't wear the hijab. So it was sort of a trial by fire type of experience where I was dead set on who I was as an individual and my decision, and obviously had the support of my parents. But it's so important to reiterate that that was my choice. And, I haven't looked back, because reflecting on it, my sister actually wore the hijab 2 years after me, whenever she was ready. So it's not like it wasn't, oh, your big sister's wearing it, so you must wear it as well. Like, it was just wonderful to be able to have that freedom to make my own decisions, even at such a young age, and have the support of my parents.
Why did you decide to wear it?
Aside from the fact that I was going to an Islamic school and obviously it was part of the uniform during school hours, I felt that it may be just a piece of garment, but it brought me closer to my faith. I was very interested in theology, even at a young age. I would be reading a lot about different faiths and, how there were similarities and differences between Islam and, the other Abrahamic faiths or Buddhism. And for me, the more I sort of learned, the more I was like, you know what, like the hijab will sort of complete me. And I don't want to just be called Fatima. I want to show that I'm Fatima. And obviously when Dad sat me down, it I really respected that he respected my choice. But he reminded me that, this isn't an easy decision. Like, it's a lifelong commitment. And once you've made it, you got to stick to it. But we're here to support you all the way through, sort of thing. So it was, for me, it was just, I'm ready to embrace the next step of my faith. And for me, that was, being visibly Muslim and showing that I'm proud of my faith and my heritage. And the scarf just sort of, the hijab just, just completed it.
In some of our exchange over email, you sent some notes along. I get the impression there's a bit of a punk streak that runs through you. that othering and realizing what was happening to you, how did that impact your, I guess, shape your way of interacting with the rest of Australia that wasn't Muslim?
Yeah, that's a great question, because growing up as the eldest of 4 children and, you know, my parents not having the most fluent English, I was the interpreter and translator in every scenario and situation. So you could say that I grew up a lot faster than my age, and I just had to step up and adult a lot earlier. But that taught me a lot of lessons, and I think it gave me that sense of maturity of like looking at the world from a different lens. I didn't quite understand, and I refused to just sort of subject myself to the othering of people who quite didn't understand. And for me, I was always like, maybe you've got to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they have not met someone who looks like me. Maybe they have watched things on the internet that has painted a particular perspective of what Muslims or people with a hijab look like or what they believe in. And so I love a good challenge. Mum and Dad would always say that I was quite rebellious when I was younger, you know, causing all sorts of trouble. And they would say whenever the house was quiet, we'd be very terrified because we knew that you were up to no good. So it was sort of that, the confidence of being the eldest child, having so much responsibilities over my younger siblings, but also helping Mum and Dad in various, you know, parts of our lives and aspects, that sort of gave me the audacity to, like, you know, create a narrative in my head to be like, I'm not going to let people other me because I look different or because there's a deficiency in me. You know, people probably don't know me, and that's why they think that way of me. Yeah. And so I'm going to either wait for them to educate themselves, or I'll use the opportunity to educate them. Because I remember going to an interfaith excursion. So our schools would organize excursions and interfaith gatherings with other schools of faith. And I remember having a conversation with a priest, and I was like, I don't know, maybe 13. And he was like, you know, you're very mature for your age and you know quite a lot. And I was like, well, I just read a lot. And I find it very fascinating that we can live in a country and come from all walks of life and still be able to call ourselves Australian and live harmoniously. Like, it's wonderful. It's what makes Australia, you know, this beautiful, thriving democracy. But, like, you know, not victimizing or reducing myself because I wanted to fit in, basically, is probably, the punk in me, where I was like, you know what? I don't care. This is who I am. And if people don't like it, well, tough luck. That's it. You've for.
So you're a big music fan, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. But I'd love to get your thoughts on the relationship of immigrant communities shaping Australia's identity through art. I've recently realized most of my favorite Aussie artists are First Nations, or what we can sum up as immigrants, first, second gen, struggling with their own identity, something I probably relate to as the rest of my family are about to become Aussies. It's not really a question so much as, do you have some thoughts on that aspect of this culture, which I feel like is genuinely thriving, even if people aren't paying as much attention to it as they should be?
Yeah, I think art is such a powerful form of expressing ourselves. But yeah, like you said, it's not always, you know, making that conscious decision or noticing it around us. It definitely strengthens the fabric of our society. I think it brings so much more richness into who we are as Australians. You know, I remember growing up, and Harmony Week was a beautiful celebration of cultures and languages and music and food. And, you know, I have always felt like Australia is this bowl of fruit salad where it's just, we haven't just mushed together. It's not like we've turned into soup because everyone's blended in. but we've kept our characters, we've kept our unique perspectives and cultural roots, and we bring a different flavor to the dish. And I think people often forget or take it for granted. And that's where I have a particular issue with culture wars and, you know, the constant scapegoating or pitting one community against another because of the agendas that may be, or, you know, foreign influence or external players that really meddle into our social cohesion. And I know that some viewers of yours might hear the word social cohesion and be triggered, and I don't blame them, because we've seen in sort of the last year and a half or 2 years that that phrase has been used to silence a community. And it is that sort of discrepancy in standards that make people feel like, you know, do I belong? Do I not? How do I express myself? How do I know that I have the same equal rights as someone else, and bring my true authentic self to the table without feeling, you know, that I have to minimize myself. And I think, yeah, art and music and just various cultures, you know, can really be that common denominator where it brings people together rather than drift us apart.
I find, I don't even know how to explain this, but I find that there's this endless question of what is Australia? And when you read so much of the best fiction of the last 20 years, the question increasingly becomes, it's a country of immigrants, which everybody except for First Nations are immigrants, however they choose to describe that or not. But this idea that perhaps the country's getting close to understanding what is Australia, because they're now publishing stories about what it's like to arrive here and acclimate and struggle with identity, rather than you know how poetic the bush is, which it is. But there's more than those tropes.
And I think I'd love to add to that, you know, we need to be proud of the history of Australia, and we need to go out of our way to actually understand and appreciate how did Australia, you know, how did it come to be? You can't just, you know, we can't ignore the atrocities, the genocide that took place of First Nations people. And I think we're still very reluctant in actually acknowledging and putting it in our constitution that First Nations people were here before the settlers, and that path to reconciliation, what that looks like, needs to be well defined and actually upheld across jurisdictions and honoured, rather than downplaying the pain, the struggle, the trauma that First Nations people have gone through and are still going through. So I think we've got a long way to go. We've made progress, and obviously the immigrant communities are enriching what it means for us to embrace modern day Australia. But I think if we don't pay due respect and really forge that path to reconciliation with First Nations people taking the charge to do it, then we're really just kidding ourselves in terms of trying to paint a picture of Australia without realizing that there is so much history, and history doesn't lie. You know, it is what it is. How do we strengthen ourselves as a nation by ensuring First Nations people don't feel neglected or left behind because, you know, it's a touchy topic or it's too tough to be discussing, or people deflecting blame and saying, well, you know, I just arrived 30, 40 years ago, so it's not my fault. Why should I be apologizing, or why should I feel bad? But I think truth-telling is an important part of that process of what it means to be Australian.
Hey, Story Talkers, sorry for the interruption. But just a quick reminder before we dive into the second half of today's episode. After this episode wraps, head to the episode notes to find out how to listen to Senator Fatima Payman's bonus app discussion of a seminal piece of art from her life, the song Killing in the Name from Rage Against the Machine. The best way to do that is over at Apple, or even better, the 5 a.m. StoryTalk newsletter at Substack, where you'll also get access to hundreds of arts and culture articles, podcast apps, and creative resources you'll enjoy whether you're an artist or an arts fanatic. Now, back to my chat with Senator Payman. Well, let's talk more specifically about politics, starting with how does the daughter of a refugee go from working as a pharmacist assistant in 2020 to being elected a senator for the Labour Party in 2022? It's quite an upgrade.
Yeah, it's not the normal trajectory of pharmacy assistants. You often become a pharmacist and then wake your way up. But politics was never supposed to be, in the bigger picture. I think sort of that drive to give myself the audacity to be in spaces where I may be the only one who stuck out like a sore thumb allowed me to be okay with the discomfort in finding myself in settings where I wanted my voice to be heard. I wanted my views to be heard. I wanted to be part of the change that I wanted to see in the world. And for me, that was youth politics. And that drive just went on. That drive, I think, just multiplied when I lost my dad in 2018 to acute myeloid leukemia. And seeing such a strong, independent man become frail and weak, it shattered me. And being the eldest, I didn't know how to deal with my grief. So I did go through a period after Dad's passing trying to figure out what is life. Dad was only 47 years old. He had so much going on for him. He had sacrificed so much for us, and he wasn't even able to enjoy the fruits of his hard labor. So upon hours of counseling and seeing a psychologist, despite the stigma, might I add, that mental health has, not just in my community, but just among young people and stuff, it highlighted the importance of making the most of every moment and making every moment count. I don't have any guarantee of how long I would live and how much time I've got left, but I know that if I live with the motto of I don't want to live a life with regrets, that I would take every opportunity that comes my way, that I want to leave the world in a better shape than I came into it, then I think that's a good life. You can say that you've done your fair share. And so I just threw myself into volunteering. And while I was studying my master's in pharmacy and working as a pharmacy assistant, I also on the side was volunteering for various not-for-profit organizations. And I stumbled upon an MP at an event who said, if you want to know what a day in a politician's life looks like, hit me up. And I was like, you know what? I'll take you up on that offer, because why not? I had this really serious attitude of why not? I'm going to give it a shot. If it's not for me, I'll just, bounce out. But at least I won't live with the regret of what if. What if I'd taken that opportunity? What if I'd stepped through that door? And that's where my journey into politics began, where I started volunteering for the Labour Party. I went to a few young Labour meetings, realised that it was a very heavily male-dominated space, guys between the ages of 21 and 26 thinking, they're the bee's knees. And I was like, well, we definitely need to make young Labour more reflective of our everyday society. So I sort of took it on myself to go and talk to friends and be like, guys, do you want to get involved? And this was through uni and various uni clubs that I was involved in. And yeah, fast forward, I'd sort of taken a role as an electorate officer at an MP's office and then moved my way up into the union movement. So the union movement in particular resonated heavily with me as I reflected on Dad's struggles, being overworked and underpaid, and then saw that same struggle being replicated in the lives of so many other people, especially those really feminized industries like aged care and early childhood education and laundry workers or workers in the poultry industry. and realized that, there's no point of just being present or talking about change unless you see change happen. And so, the union movement sort of allowed me that avenue to actually talk to these workers, make sure that they understood their workers' rights, organize them, attend, rallies and protests and strikes and what that meant for them. And when I think it was my second year in the role as an organizer at the union, when I was tapped on the shoulder and they asked, do you want to run as number 3 on the Senate ticket? And my answer was, no, I don't think I'm ready. And they were like, oh, look, we haven't won it since 1984. This is way before you were born, so don't stress. This is just going to be a good campaigning experience. And I'm like, sure, I'm down for learning more and absorbing, and took the opportunity. And I think it shocked everybody, including myself, when I was elected, because nobody saw it coming. And I think I'm a big believer that things happen for a reason. And here I am, fast forward 4 years, and it's been quite the journey.
So in 2024, your political career took a dramatic turn. You quit the Labour Party. Can you tell me what happened?
So in 2024, when I made the big decision to leave my political family, the Labour Party, that I had worked so hard, campaigned alongside both the state election and the federal election, and subsequently was elected, I had a serious moral dilemma. I was in a situation where my conscience was not at peace. I felt that the brave Labour Party that I joined was no longer emulating that same level of bravery that not just me, but many rank and file members wanted to see. I would be hounded on the streets via email, letters to my office from rank and file members from various branches of the Labour Party saying, when you were elected, we saw hope. You're not just the token Muslim girl that got elected, but there is so much that you represent, including the voices of young people and the students. I must say, we're the backbone of our nation. When 7th of October took place and then the subsequent bombardment and genocide that unfolded in Gaza, and the students protested, and the students saw themselves reflected in me and were asking, why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you speaking out? And I was always a big believer of, change happens from within. So you can't sit on the sidelines and expect change to just miraculously take place. You've got to enter the system. You've got to learn the game. You've got to work it and make sure that, you're part of those conversations. You're in those rooms. But I was in those rooms and I was having those conversations and I was knocking on those doors and I was talking to those ministers. And yet it felt like I was going nowhere. It felt like I was just, the little puppy that you just hush away, and don't pay attention to. It really felt disappointing, but also disheartening that is this what I signed up to? I was up at night thinking, this isn't the Labour Party that I joined. This just can't be. We have passed resolutions at national conferences, at state conferences. I have taken charge in recruiting people to talk on motions during these conferences. Surely there's got to be something I'm missing. And I'm gaslighting myself through this whole process. Am I just not getting it? Is it me? Is it a me problem? And it wasn't until, various things had taken place, including, the conversation around the arms and ammunition information that came out of a Senate estimates hearing, that I confronted the defense minister, who's also the deputy prime minister. And I was like, what's going on? There's clearly a loophole. Why are we not closing that loophole? Why are we allowing that to be exploited, and then that's just digging ourselves a deeper grave? And to that, the response I got was, well, this is how it's been since forever. Like, this is how we've been doing things. And it's like, yeah, but aren't we supposed to be the progressive party that makes solid, brave reforms take place, and we want change for the better rather than just sticking with the status quo? And then obviously, you know, you would open your phone, any app or news, and you would just see the genocide live stream. You would see the horrifying images, the videos, the cries for help. Like, I couldn't sleep at night. Like, mind you, I left the Labor Party on 4th of July. I know, what a day to leave the Labor Party and become an independent senator. 4th of July, 2024, I left. February 18 was when I got married. So I had also just been, you know, a newlywed couple, and my husband and I initially were at odds of like, how are we going to navigate this? Because he was a senior advisor to a state Labor minister, and he'd gone through the party ranks as well. So we both met through the Labor Party. So thank God for the Labor Party. But, you know, it was a tough decision and discussion to have. And when he saw how it was just deteriorating me, I was being hospitalized for migraines that the doctors couldn't explain, and then saying that I've got, you know, idiopathic intracranial hypertension with all the stress that's going on. And my caucus, instead of actually saying, all right, well, let's take this seriously, they just suggested I take 2 weeks off and go on a holiday. And I was like, well, that's not going to stop what we're doing. We're here elected in our positions, in our roles, with the responsibility to represent the people's voices. And right now, everyone's looking up to us to be the voice of reason, to have a moral backbone, to actually do what's right, not what's politically convenient. And I just kept on being shut down. So to make that decision and say, you know what, I'm in the brink of losing my health. I have lost the battle within my party to actually make any form of change happen because nobody's listening. They're just treating me as that, you know, little girl that's just making a lot of noise, but, you know, eventually she'll get bored and shut up. And I was like, I want to be able to live with this decision. I want to be able to look back into history and say that I was able to stand up for what I believed in. I was able to speak up for the thousands and hundreds and thousands of people in Australia who are like, enough is enough, like, not in our name, not using our taxpayer dollars. We don't want to be involved in this genocide. We want our government to take a stronger action. And this had been done with the Iraq War, had been done before with Vietnam War. Like, this wasn't the first time. And yet the complicity and silence was just deafening. So it was definitely a tough decision to cross the floor. And for your audience, those who don't know what crossing the floor means, it's like the biggest sin you can ever commit as being part of the Labor Party, to stray away and do the opposite of what the collective have decided to do. And it was a simple question. It was a question of recognizing Palestine as its own state. And lo and behold, 15 months later, after they voted that motion down, they recognized Palestine as a state. And it was like, yeah, I felt validated. I was like, and vindicated. I was like, oh, like, I was about to swear, sorry. I was going to say, holy shit. Well, like, it's incredible that they had to make me go through that entire crazy saga for like 3-4 weeks. You know, my face plastered on the front pages of every bloody newspaper. And yet 15 months later, they did exactly that. It's like, guys, it was in our party platform. Our members wanted it. The broader Australian public wanted it. It was the sensible thing to do. Why did it have to take 15 months for us to do it? So anyways, I have not looked back with regret or remorse, because I think if I was to do it all over again, the only thing I'd change is probably do it sooner.
I know we only have so much time, so I'm going to avoid interrogating that further and discussing things like censorship and the current hate speech laws, all of which I'd love to get into at some point. But I am curious, the Labour Party let you down, and I'm not sure I have the confidence in it to face what's coming. Something like One Nation, this is a country struggling with the Americanization of politics, divisiveness, and unfriendly media, from the Murdochs and more. Do you think the Labour Party is up to the task of pushing back against this really culture-shaking threat?
When the Labour Party won the second election in 2025, I thought, you know what, this is their opportunity in second term to really show the bravery and courage that we want to see from our government. They've won so many seats, a majority government, since Federation. Like, that's huge. A single party winning that many seats, it's a massive, massive feat. Do I think that they have the courage to face the lobby groups, Murdoch Media, Pauline Hanson's culture war? I don't think so. I don't think that unless there is an internal shift in their way of operating, unless they truly connect with people on the ground and drown out the noise of what Murdoch's putting out, what the right-wing cookers are saying, what Pauline Hanson is driving, and the division she's driving. I don't think, if they are constantly operating from a place of fear and small target approach where they're like, oh, we shouldn't rock the boat, we just want to stay in power as long as possible, then there is going to be no change. We cannot expect any progress to take place. We're just probably going to stay where we are, maybe drift further to the right, potentially have more incidents where one group's pitted against another, where, various cultures feel neglected or silenced because their pain doesn't matter, because they may not have the support or backing of massive lobby groups, or the media corporations have no vested interest in them, so they don't really care. Something as simple and basic as, the Bondi massacre that took place and how everyone was very vocal about condemning it, and rightfully so. But then to have a similar attack happen in Perth during a peaceful protest of First Nations people and their supporters and allies just on Monday, yes, the bomb didn't detonate. But if it had detonated, 2,000 people were in that rally. It would have been catastrophic. Like, why do we need casualties for us to realize the gravity and similarity of situations and calling it for what it is? And that's where I think Australians are mostly they're sick and tired of politicking. They want politicians to just be upfront and honest, to not treat people like they're dumb or they don't understand what's going on, and to just be fair in the way they are conducting themselves. You don't need to be screaming from the rooftops to get your point across, but at the same time, you don't need to be so placid and immune to what's happening around you where, I don't know, it's like, why are you even in the position then? Do you want progress? Do you want change to take place? Or are you just there because it's a good paying job and you don't really have to think for yourself because your party is thinking for you? Like, yeah, I think it will take the crossbench and independent MPs and senators and the broader public to really put pressure on the Labor Party for them to do what's necessary. And even in saying that, I think they will just drag it on and may delay it, delay progressive reform as long as they can, to hold on to power for as long as they can, and then just hope for the best when it comes to next election because of that short-termism and that short-term mindset that they operate from, rather than looking at the bigger picture and saying, we may only be in power for 6 years. How do we make the most of it? How do we bring in incredible reforms like the Medicare, the superannuation that, Labor giants introduced, and it was super controversial back then, but now we're all benefiting from it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, just because something's unpopular at a time doesn't mean that it's not going to have, positive impacts on people. As long as you're doing it the right way, you're consulting, you're thoroughly doing your research, not rushing through it, like we're seeing with hate speech laws or gun law reforms, like or the social media ban, for example, that I'm quite vocal about. You can't just have a short 24-hour or 3-day consultation period and it's not a box-ticking exercise. You've got to do it thoroughly, because half-baked policies will have half-baked outcomes.
Thank you so much. We're going to be back in a moment to talk about Rage Against the Machine, which is going to, I think, explain a lot of this part of the conversation. But I appreciate your time so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Cole. It's been great.
As for the rest of you out there listening or watching, this podcast has video now. Thanks for joining me today. But don't run just yet. There's a bonus episode with Senator Fatima Payman coming your way, which I'll tell you more about in just a moment. First, I want to know, what did you make of my featured chat with the senator? I only got through about half of my questions. I wanted to talk about so much more with her, including the hate speech laws and rise of censorship in Australia. But I only had so much time with her. That said, by the bonus app, I think she worked out she was having too much fun to stick to her schedule. We get to censorship and a whole lot more. If you have any questions or thoughts about our discussion so far, drop them in the comments on this episode at 5am Story Talk's newsletter at Substack, YouTube, or 5am Story Talk podcast at Instagram. Links in the episode notes. Now, as for that bonus episode, Senator Payman comes back to discuss Rage Against the Machine's song, Killing in the Name, from their self-titled 1992 album. The song, as you'll hear, played a crucial part in her decision to defy the Labour Party and cross the floor, as they say, to support recognizing Palestine as a state. I know having politicians on might seem like a strange thing to do for an arts podcast, but remember, this is an arts and culture podcast. Arts is politics, after all. Besides, I think there's so much we can learn from listening to how wildly different people from wildly different backgrounds think and feel about art and its role in their work and lives and our world. The best way to listen to this bonus app with Senator Payman is at Apple, or the 5am Story Talk newsletter at Substack. Links in the episode notes. That's it for today's episode, Story Talkers. Thanks as always for being here. I'll see you soon.